The Washington Commanders defense didn't just find its identity in 2024. They forged it through physicality, adaptability, and the rise of 2 new stars. That and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders. I am David Harrison, your guy on the ground covering the Washington Commanders, doing it for you here 5 days a week on the Locked On Commanders podcast, but also covering your Washington Commanders locally for WUSA9.com and for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today, everydayers, or people just coming through. I thank you all. Everydayers, though, those of you who come through every single episode, a special thank you goes out to you. And of course, anybody out there, if you're not already subscribed for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast, please do so now. If it's your first time coming through, I appreciate you finding the show. Hopefully you enjoy what you hear and you come back again very soon. Coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk about the Commanders sustaining their defensive successes in 2025, looking for speed, versatility, and a full buy-in into Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr.'s vision. We're going to highlight the unit's most dominant performances, biggest playmakers, and the moments that defined their identity all season long. But first, we're going to break down how the Washington Commanders defense evolved week by week in 2024 and why physicality became its defining trait. All of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Yesterday, we took a look at the Washington Commanders offense, kind of took a look back, breaking down how the identity was established. Obviously, a lot of conversation about Jaden Daniels, the centerpiece to the whole thing, quarterback being what it is. Had to dedicate a good amount of time to that. We're going to do a similar conversation about the defense here, and this is all basically setting the stage for later on in the week. We're going to then take the challenges that we identified from last year's defensive and offensive performances, look at the new players on the team, and see where they fit in to solving some of those challenges, because we know, especially with the defense, that this is the unit. When you look at the offense versus the defense is the unit that more often than not, if one side or the other let the other down, it was this side of the ball that let them down, right? But the Commanders' defense in 2024 was still successful in a lot of different ways. Built on physicality, grew through adversity, and took shape around the emergence of players like linebacker Frankie Luvu and cornerback Mikey Sainristil. So we're going to lay out how the defense evolved over the course of 2024 and what its defining traits were. So the first quarter of the season, right? Games 1 through really 5, because we kind of can't really break it evenly up into 4 quarters anymore now that we have the extra regular season game. But really weeks 1 through 5 or so, we saw a really strong focus from Joe Witt Jr.'s defense in containing explosive plays and stopping the run. Like there was a real deliberate operation intent for doing that, controlling the trenches and allowing for rookies like Mikey Sainristil to kind of get up to speed to the NFL. Physicality, discipline were the biggest points that were preached by the coaches throughout that stretch, but the pass rush was significantly lacking. I remember for quite a long time, I think the first 3 weeks or so, Clelin Ferrell actually led this team in sacks. And I remember talking to you guys during that stretch and saying it's either really good news for Clelin Ferrell or it's really bad news for the rest of the defense. Well, it turned out it was really bad news for the rest of the defense. They needed to get that pass rush going. Also, while they were deliberately trying to keep a lid on offenses, the secondary was giving up more deep passes than they can reasonably allow. Weeks 6 through 12 specifically. Now, the shift happened before then, of course. Mikey Sainristil moved outside. We saw more shift to aggressive schematic type of approach, incorporating more blitz packages, things like that. Again, those started before week 6, but really week 6 forward is where we started to see it really take place. Hunting takeaways. You got Mikey Sainristil's first career interception against the Baltimore Ravens. Frankie Luvu really started to emerge in the stat box where he had emerged previously on film. I remember having several conversations early in the season with Frankie, kind of pointing out to him that, and I wasn't the only media member, and I certainly wasn't, there were certainly fans that were watching the game as well, but point out to him, like, look, we see a lot of what you're doing. We see the disruption. We see you breaking up the screen pass flow so that guys like Bobby Wagner can come in and get the TFL, things like that. But they started to show up. Those efforts started to show up on or in the stat box as well. And that's really where you saw Frankie Lou kind of start to hone in his personality on this team. Mikey Sainristil grew into his role very, very quickly, started showing his maturity, his leadership ability early on in the season. The defense just became more opportunistic. They became more disruptive. Communication appeared to be at an all-time high. And go back to that Dante Fowler Jr. interception. Communication was the whole thing that really kind of set that whole thing up. From there, week 13 into the end of the season, into the postseason, we really saw the team hone in on what they do best. Now, the run defense didn't do great against top shelf teams, obviously. But if you go back and really contextualize everything, the scheme, the players showed the ability to adapt. And even in some of those high rush yard production games for opponents like the Philadelphia Eagles, if you go back and remember, they actually kept Saquon Barkley specifically contained for the majority of those games. Now, again, it's a holistic body of work, right? Nobody cares about the fact that you kept him to, 40-something yards for the first three quarters. You give up 110 yards in the fourth quarter. You still gave up 150 yards rushing. And those aren't exact numbers. I'm just giving you an example, right? So again, the totality is what matters. But the key here is to understand it's not from lack of ability, it's from lack of consistency. And that's where the team really needed to get better against the run. Now, explosive plays became more limited. It's something we heard Joey Jr. really kind of harp on. We talked about it a lot here on the program about the team being one of the top 10 as far as preventing explosive passing plays to opposing offenses, which is not something that started the year with. Red zone defense solidified. The team seemed to execute as a unit without a lot of strain. Again, at some point, especially as a defense, you kind of just are what you are. It's kind of hard to, in the middle of the season or especially a late run of the season, get better at something you've been bad at, right? But so we're not saying that they became this super strong unit, but what they did well, they did without a lot of stress going on. Now, playoffs, we saw arguably the best all-around defensive performance, I would say, in a game coming up against the Detroit Lions. They sacked Jared Goff twice, hit him 7 times, picked him off 4 times, and forced and recovered a fumble. Very good all-around defensive performance by the Washington Commanders against one of the best offenses in the National Football League, arguably the best team in the NFC, according to a lot of other people. Looking for defining traits in the defense in 2024, really there's one: physicality, right? By far the most common thread throughout the entire defensive evolution from the beginning to the end. Physicality was at the center of everything that Joey Jr., Dan Quinn wanted to instill in their defense. And the emergence of guys like Frankie Luvu, Mikey Sainristil as foundational players for the future. Obviously, you love someone like Bobby Wagner, but he's kind of a year-to-year guy at this point in his career. So it's kind of hard to say that he is a foundational player. Certainly someone who's going to help lay the foundation for the future of this defense. But guys like Frankie Luvu, Mikey Sainristil, you look at them from 2024 and say they can certainly be, and you can see the future for them as foundational players for this defense. Luvu for his versatility from the linebacker position, ability to rush the passer, stop the run, cover, at least adequately enough, consistently disruptive, getting turnovers, sacks, making clutch plays, and his leadership, that relentless energy that really made him a favorite for fans, media, players, and the team alike. Mikey Sainristil developed that shutdown mentality. Again, clarify shutdown mentality. Not saying he's a shutdown corner this early in his career, but he developed that shutdown mentality, a ball hawking type of person, came up with clutch plays, paired that with maturity that goes beyond his experience level, really helped cement the culture in the locker room, even as a first-year player. So the trend with the team, increased man coverage, single high looks as the season progressed. Not really a surprise, kind of what we expected to see when this staff was hired anyway, but we certainly saw that come to fruition with some key personnel movements and identity that showed up in big moments, but it was the best calls and the biggest plays that really helped the defense win some of these games during the 2024 NFL season. We're going to talk about those coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to show up for something big, just like the Commanders defense sometimes did in 2024? Maybe it's game day and you're suddenly thinking, man, I need to be there. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. Just like Frankie Luvu showing up in crunch time, Game Time delivers fast. With the money you save on tickets, you can treat your crew to merch, food, or even bring more fans along with you. Game Time makes it possible to turn a last-minute decision into a full-blown experience. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and stress-free. Prices drop as you get closer to kickoff or first pitch, and the app has amazing last-minute deals, seat views, and the lowest price guarantee, so you're not overthinking anything. just like Mikey Sainristil reading a route and jumping on an errant pass. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create your account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create your account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The Commanders' defense found its identity, but it was the biggest calls and the clutch plays that turned that identity into winning efforts as the defense helped win a good amount of games. Again, I kind of made this case at the end of last season. You can't be a 12-win team in the regular season and make it all the way to the NFC Championship game if your defense is terrible. Certainly you could do it if your defense isn't great, right? And I've kind of always also said that in the NFL, if you're going to be a contender, you either need a killer quarterback or a killer defense. If you have both, you're probably going to win some rings. The Washington Commanders certainly look to have a killer at the quarterback position in Jaden Daniels. Now it's about trying to get as much killer mentality out of that defense as possible. Not always perfect, certainly has its flaws. That's what this is all about, setting up the stage of what the Commanders defense was coming out of 2024 or is coming out of 2024, what it could be entering 2025 later on in the week. So we're going to highlight some top moments. We're going to look at some schematic adjustments, impact plays that shaped the season in 2024. And I think when we talk about the top three defensive performances, these are in my personal view. And yes, some of these matchups came up against teams that are not so great. All three of these teams that they came up against did not make the playoffs. So when you're talking about kind of where you are as a team, you've got games that you should be winning, which these games, if you're going to be a playoff contender, an NFC Championship game contender, a Super Bowl contender, you should certainly be winning games against non-playoff teams. Games that you should be expecting to be competitive in. Those are teams that are on the cusp, the Steelers, the Dallas Cowboys, teams like that. And then games that you want to be competitive in against the teams of like the Baltimore Ravens, the Philadelphia Eagles, etc. So top three defensive performances from the Washington Commanders 2024 defense. Number one is going to be week 7 against the Carolina Panthers, 40-7 victory. And something that really kind of stood out in my memory as I went back through these games about that one is that's the game where Jaden Daniels gets injured on the very first possession of the game for the Commanders and ends up leaving. And that's a moment where I remember, the air just came out of Northwest Stadium, right? Like the home crowd, just everybody just kind of, it was one of those moments where it's kind of like, this is what we were worried about when he was drafted and the way that he plays and all this other stuff. And you could just kind of feel the energy drain from the entire stadium, right? That's a moment where if you're a team that not only is led by a quarterback, but lives and dies with that quarterback, that team dies. And that's a moment where that team, even though the Washington Commanders are much better than the Carolina Panthers in that moment, could certainly fall apart, could certainly underperform and end up even losing that game. Or maybe you still win it, but it's like 35-32, much closer than it should have been, all that kind of stuff. Not in this case. In this case, the Washington Commanders go on to win 40-7, absolutely put a whooping on the Carolina Panthers, as they should have. But again, because of the context of Jaden Daniels getting injured in that game, a little bit in question there early on. Marcus Mariota comes in, balls out. The defense does a great job. Obviously, that's where we want to focus here. Allowed just 7 total points, a season best for the entire year. No team, or that's the lowest they held any team to in the season. Recorded 2 interceptions, including a pick 6 by Dante Fowler Jr. that we just referenced a little bit ago. Held the Panthers to just 85 net passing yards and only 180 total net yards for the entire game. Just a very, very impressive all-around performance by the team, but specifically here by the defense. Our second game, week 5 against the Cleveland Browns, a 34-13 win over the Browns, racked up 7 total sacks, including 2.5 by Frankie Luvu, 1.5 by Bobby Wagner. You love that second level pressure coming from the defense. Limited Cleveland to just over 100 rushing yards on 23 attempts, forced multiple 3-and-outs, including 3 in a row just in the first half alone, and allowed just 1 touchdown on 11 drives, that touchdown coming essentially in garbage time. And then the final one, our third one, it's going to be kind of weird to say this because they won the game on a Hail Mary at the last second. But the defensive performance against Chicago Bears, look, it's an 18-15 win. They posted a first half shutout. They allowed 0 points, under 100 yards before halftime, recorded a takeaway that came in the red zone. In fact, held the Bears to 1 for 2 in the red zone, just 2 of 12 on third down. Yeah, the Washington Bears defense did give up a couple touchdowns there late in the game. But guys, when you're giving up only 7 points through 3 quarters and you got the 5th best scoring offense in the NFL, that should not be a close game, right? That should not be a close game. So the reason that game ends up close, the reason the Washington Commanders end up needing the Hail Mary at the end of the game, yeah, you could say, well, the Commanders gave up that last rushing touchdown to Johnson that gave the Bears lead. Got it. I put it on the offense no matter what. I put it on the offense regardless. You hold a team to 15 points, you should win that game 9.5 weeks out of 10. I don't care what you say about anything else. That's just the way that I feel about the NFL today. The mark of demarcation or whatever it is like 24. 24 is always to me, it's like the race to 24. Whoever gets 24 first, most often you're going to win the game. When you don't even get to 24, when you get 9 points away from 24, your defense did a really good job. 3 stars of the year coming out of 2024 that are certainly going to help this team continue the success they did have and build on it to get success where they need to build success. Off of 2024, linebacker Bobby Wagner consistently led the defense, high tackle counts, solo and assisted tackles, contributing for TFLs, quarterback hits, and passes defense, and more importantly than anything else, coach on the field. Absolutely delivered on that mark. We all talked about that when he was signed by the team in the first place. Joe Witt Jr. several times during the season talked about moments where opposing teams were going no huddle. They were moving with such tempo that he really didn't have the opportunity to get the call down to Bobby Wagner. So Bobby is down there on the field making the calls on the fly on his own, and said more times than not he made the absolute right call. So Bobby Wagner absolutely invaluable to this team in 2024, going to be invaluable to this team in 2025. Linebacker Frankie Luvu demonstrated his effectiveness as a pass rusher and a run defender, tackles for loss, sacks, quarterback hits, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries, the whole 9 yards. Frankie Luvu, an absolute beast and animal out there for the defense, coming back for 2025 to help continue what they were building last year. And then cornerback Mikey Sainristil, we've been talking about him as well all throughout the episode, played a pivotal role in pass coverage and turnovers, started off as a nickel, had to move outside. I mean, this is a rookie, right? This is a rookie playing what I feel like is the second hardest position on the field to transition from college to the pros. And not only is he doing a nickel to start, but then they move him outside. And not only does he do nickel well, he does the outside well. And now he's moving back inside a nickel. Like, the dude just impressed all up and down the season, contributed with tackles, passes defense, interceptions, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries, contributing to those, I should say, as well. Mikey Sainristil certainly showing that he is a valuable part of this team, even in just one season. Some challenges that this defense faced in 2024 that they're going to have to focus on getting right in 2025. They struggled early on with communication and tackling. Go back in the time machine and remember how many times, especially early in the season, did we just say, man, can you guys just tackle, bro? Just tackle, right? We talked about with Joe Witt, like, how do you train tackling during the season? How do you do this? Because you don't want to be tackling each other. You're not allowed to be tackling each other in practice. How do you get this thing better? They talked about aiming points. They talked about angles, right? All that kind of stuff. Eventually it started to get better. Is this team going to start off that way again this season? Because I'll tell you right now, if they do, Tyrone Tracy and Cam Scatterbo for the New York Giants, Josh Jacobs for the Green Bay Packers, Ashton Genty for the Las Vegas Raiders. Like, there are some really good running backs early on this schedule for the Washington Commanders defense. And it's not just running backs, we're talking about receivers and quarterbacks as well, but specifically running backs. If they can't tackle early and they're miscommunicating early, that's going to be a problem. Inconsistent edge pressure. Obviously, the team got stronger, got bigger on the defensive line, on the edge. Guys like Jacob Martin, all this stuff, we'll see if they can set those edges a little bit better. And then depth issues got exposed in certain packages. Certainly, you can never have a team that's just 100% deep in every single position group. It's not possible. But the key is staying healthy in the right places where you're a little bit more shallow. And, if you do have to take an injury, hopefully you have it in a place where you have some depth to step up. So those plays, those factors define the season in 2024. But the real question moving forward is which strengths can carry over and stay consistent in 2025. That is what we're going to dive into later this week, but we're also going to dive into it a little bit here coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Washington Commanders defense showed some real growth in some important areas in 2024. Sustaining that success is going to depend on speed, versatility, and full buy-in into the system. So when we look at sustainable strengths from this Washington Commanders defense that they can take into 2025 and make this unit even better than it was last year, or better than it was last year just in general, especially against the run, the buy-in. I think the buy-in has to be one of the most important parts, right? The coaching in the NFL is one of the most underrated factors to a team's success and failure. We talk about quarterbacks, we talk about stars, we talk about all this other stuff, but we don't really wrap our heads around a lot just how important coaching really is at the pro level, and it's incredibly important. But we talk about the defense. We talked about this before. Every day, as you remember hearing this in the past. The defense, more than anything, is 11 dudes working in unison. One guy out of place, one guy misses his assignment, one guy goes off script, it can throw the entire 11 just out of whack. On offense, that's not necessarily the case. Like Zach Ertz comes out of the blocks, falls down, falls on his face. As long as there's not a blitzer coming there that he's supposed to be blocking, that play can still succeed. On the defense, your pass rusher goes down. Next thing you know, your D tackle is being double teamed. And now a guy that should have been struggling against the D tackle is free to roam. And now your safety coming off the second level gets picked up easily. Boom, your entire coverage is blown and your entire defense is just screwed, right? You can't have those types of mistakes happening. Even something as innocent as that can just throw a wrench in everything. So that means that all 11 guys on the field, and really, right, go back to what Joe Wade Jr. said last year. It's not just 11 starters. There's like 15, 16 starters on this defense and like 20-something guys that are going to rotate in and out during packages, looks, and all that stuff. Each one of these guys has to buy in. They've got to understand and they've got to believe in what the coaching staff is giving them, which is what makes it so valuable is when you hear these guys talk about culture and you hear these guys talk about, Dan Quinn being a player's coach, understanding who they are, coming at them in a way that makes them respect them. It's very, very important. It's very, very critical to the entire thing. So that was established, obviously, in 2024. They need to continue building on that. And I think so far they really have. Talking to some of the new players, Jonathan Jones, Will Harris, Dietrich Weiss Jr., they all seem to be buying in very, very solidly. Improved tackling fundamentals. We saw the tackling get better during the season. We saw it kind of fade away. Tackling is one of those things that you don't ever really sit here and say, man, they tackled the heck out of those ball carriers today. It's kind of like kickers. You really only notice them when they're not doing well. So the tackling fundamentals got better during the season. That doesn't mean that they never had missed tackles down the stretch and all that stuff, but certainly weren't having missed tackle problems the way they were early in the season. That needs to start right off the bat. We kind of just talked about it again. The running backs that this team is going to face just early in the year and just throughout the year, they need to be out here tackling fundamentally and solid from the jump. Speed and versatility at every level. I think the team's gotten a lot better at that. They don't have that Jeremy Chin quote unquote 1-for-1 replacement, but they do have more guys that can play deep, play in the box, attack the run game, to help out in the pass game, all those things. I think that speed and versatility is going to help them out. Trey Amos is an athletic freak. He's got the speed, the length, and he's got the dog in him to play up close, put his face in the fan, as they like to say, all those things. So you like that ahead. Or like that as well. Looking ahead, can they sustain the late season success that they had in the areas they did have success? More blitzes, single high coverage ability. Will consistency from the edge rush emerge? We're going to talk later this week about the new additions to this team and how they might impact some of the challenges we saw this defense go through in 2024. Turn those challenges into growth, turn it into potential successes and strengths in 2025. That's going to do it for today's episode. Next time on Locked On Commanders, it's mailbag time. Mailbag Wednesday coming up. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments, you can text them directly to me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And for the most part, everything you hear on the show or any breaking news you hear on the show that we talk about, you're going to hear first as an insider via text message. And then you can text me and tell me how awesome or terrible I am at my job. Thanks for making Locked On Commanders your first listen today and every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast as the Commanders build a defense rooted in physicality, speed, and smarts. Aggressive scheming, of course. Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino dive into how teams across the league build sustainable success through roster strategy and long-term planning. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you're getting this podcast. To the everydayers, I see you every day, appreciate you every day, and I thank you every day. Until next time, be safe if you're out and about. We'll talk again soon, right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.